Everybody, welcome back to the Tropical MBA podcast. The boss man and I just got back from Thailand and we flipped on the mics to share our experience. So stick around to this free-flowing conversation. We touch on a lot of stuff, like, for example, who are the types of founders that build 7- and 8-figure businesses? What do they have in common and what can we learn from them? We talk about how they're using AI similar to how we used offshore talent 10 years ago. What are the similarities, differences? How are they using it to make money? We also talk about some things like how much does it cost to retire in Thailand? What is our version of financial independence, retire early? Also, how these successful founders are dealing with some of the uncertainty we're seeing in our economy today. So all that and more in today's episode. Thanks for listening. Let's roll it. I'm quoting DC member Mohit right now. What happens when you put some of the brightest minds in online entrepreneurship across the globe together for 3 days? In a word, magic. This weekend, I had the privilege of attending the first DC Black event in Asia, an intimate mastermind with some of the sharpest minds in the online business space. What made this gathering special wasn't just the luxury venue or the carefully crafted activities. What made it special was the caliber of entrepreneurs in the room. Spending 3 days with fellow 7- and 8-figure business owners created the perfect environment for both growth and connection. So I'm quoting Mohit's post off of LinkedIn. Shout out. Thank you for doing that. But what I wanted to do on today's episode, Ian, is if you weren't able to be in that room, we want to try to draw out some lessons. What can we learn about what 7- and 8-figure founders, some of whom are making millions a year, and a handful of who are retired early, right? This is the true fire path, is entrepreneurship, because we're seeing the results, the percentages here of the ability to choose your own path, decide how and when you're going to work, who you're going to work with, what projects excite you. We saw it all this past week, and we're going to try to share those lessons here today. So we got them in 5 points in standard TMBA fashion. So what do you say we jump into it?
Let's do it.
So the first one here, Ian, is what are entrepreneurs who would listen to this podcast, those that are making 7 and 8 figures in sales a year, sometimes millions in personal income a year, what are the core issues they're thinking about? What are the problems they're trying to solve right now in 2025? A very challenging question I just wanted to open with, Ian, is I want you to make like a crass generalization, because obviously these entrepreneurs are more successful than the average, or a lot of them are what we aspire to be. What do you think they have in common that ties them together as a group versus those of us who are struggling more?
Well, first things first, there was just shy of 25 people there. So really great opportunity to talk to everybody. And it's one of the things that we're trying to accomplish with these DC Black events. This one in Phuket, our next one is in Barcelona, is try and keep it small so everyone can meet each other during this intimate time of 2 or 3 days. So I personally had the chance to basically talk to everybody at length, pretty much as long as you wanted. And I'd say the one thing that kind of bonds people together, maybe different than what most people are meeting in their average daily life, even in Austin, Texas, for example, where I spend a lot of my time, is these people are all very curious people. Like, they're curious about life. They're curious about business. They're curious about the design of their day, their families. Like, they are just genuinely curious about everything.
I love that idea, Ian, because all of us can amp up our curiosity. Like, it's not some trait that is unobtainable to the rest of us. And, maybe you mentioned like there are some downsides to being overly curious, and this group certainly not. It's like encouraged, and people like when you push deeper. And then when you dig into the specifics is where it really gets interesting, because they tend to take this approach to all aspects of their life. So one of the big things on the opening night is we talked about like personal stuff. So people would talk about their personal passions. So one guy, for example, a lot of people say, oh, I'd love to have a legacy project, Well, one member is like bought a mountain, talked to the mayor, did all the research of how like other people develop community projects. And, you know, is like digging deep into this stuff.
You just glossed over the important part there. Bought a mountain, like a physical mountain. Okay.
You could do it. I mean, people do it. Buy a mountain, man. It's just curiosity. You know, you got to dig in a little. People, you know, digging into exiting their business. You know, they'll go off on a 6-month deal about what sort of asset do I have, who's buying them, what are the capital situations under which I could exit for this multiple versus that. You know, relationships and family is a big one that we focus on too. It's interesting just to connect across these different aspects of life, because when someone says, you know, in this group, oh, I'm interested in music or whatever, if you ask the next curious question, you are going to hear like, oh, I happen to, you know, do this. I happen to actually be a professional concert pianist or whatever. Like, there's a lot of these kinds of like taking this similar approach to, you know, being okay with not being the best for a time, but not being okay with not having the best information. It's sort of like that setup that leads to this high level entrepreneurship where, hey, I'm not going to be the best musician. I'm not going to be the best this or that for a time, but I want to have access to the best information about it. I'm curious. And that combo, there's a lot of people, they want to present themselves as better or as high status or as successful. And that mindset of not wanting to mess up can mess with the curiosity bit, where it's like, well, now I can't ask the question because then I'm indicating I'm not that great at it. You know, you just don't see any of that in this room. Everybody's just like beginner mind constantly.
You know, Dan, there's like been opportunities in my life, and I'm sure yours too, where you get to meet like famous people or people that have you know, achieved a great amount of success that is recognized by millions of people. Honestly, I think it's like more relevant and interesting to talk to these group of people than it is those people, because a lot of times those people are so far away from the thing that got them there, and they're so famous that their life exists in this other sphere that it isn't really relevant to you. But if you can be curious with these types of people, I think that you're probably a little bit better off just in terms of like the way that you're going to design your life and your business, because you have real concrete examples and people are willing to share and they're relatable. So it's just one of those things, man. I think you can like go to events and they're marketed like XYZ famous persons on stage, get to meet them or whatever. Like, I've met several of these people in my life. Like, I haven't seen much benefit from it, but I see so much benefit from meeting these 25 other people when we're in Phuket and hearing their stories. You know, guy was telling a story of almost getting acquired, like 8-figure deal. PE backed company tried to acquire his company. In the process, they got acquired, so the deal didn't go through. He like loved the process. Most people would be bummed out that this idea they didn't get acquired. He was like, it was fantastic. I'm like, well, what do you mean? He's like, well, I learned so much about how private equity works, how an exit works. He's like, now I'm like so much better equipped to handle myself in this situation. You know?
Yeah.
So you get to hear those stories firsthand that are relatable to your business.
Yeah. A couple other things. So we're making generalizations. The main one is that curious thing. I love that. That's my favorite one. But some others, one of the things they didn't have in common was business model. We had SaaS, we had D2C, we had services, you know, it's all over the map. And also hot premium pricing, mid-tier pricing, and like consumer mass general public pricing. So there was a lot of diversity. There was a lot of uniqueness in niches. And one of the things that the group did have in common, again, it's only 25 people, but I wrote down everybody. I'm pretty sure everybody was either scratching their own itch or somebody that's in their family.
Yeah.
So I do think that is kind of interesting. You know, something about, you know, that curiosity plus gathering information through doing things versus simply research. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of people get hung up. They're going to like start a business because they're researching a good idea versus like going out into the world and just doing things really well and like being curious about how things work. And I think that's where the scratch your own itch, or, you know, something that your partner is involved in, or something that someone in your family is involved in, that does seem to be, you know, something in common with at least these founders.
I want to point out one other thing too that I noticed just about the way people are working and living their lives is not everybody's working hard right now. That's like a weird, maybe interesting thing to say. But I think in this group especially, like most of these businesses are 5+ years old. A lot of them were 10 years old. So they've been around for a long time. And in terms of like the way that people work, I noticed that people worked in bursts. And I've seen this in our life in our business too, Dan, which is like you work really hard, probably for the first couple of years. If you get lucky, maybe something hits, right time, right market, all that good stuff, get yourself up to 7 figures. Maybe you chill for a while. Maybe you pursue some hobbies, family, things like that. The business has a bit of durability once it gets to the 7-figure mark. I think we've talked about this before. Like once you're there, it's kind of easier to stay there in a lot of ways. And I think these businesses had that in common too, which is they kind of rose to this level and then they got to kind of chill. And I don't think like the chill was necessarily a good or a bad thing, or even by design, but maybe they noticed like, hey, I can't have as much of an impact on my business right now. So I'm going to pursue other hobbies or interests, or I'm going to start another business or whatever. But, you know, a lot of the people in the room, I wouldn't say that they're working 40 to 60 hours a week. Some of them are working 5 hours a week. Just kind of depends on where you're at in your journey.
The 4-Hour Work Week is such a critical book to our community and podcast. You know, it was a formative book for so many of us. And in the early days, I was always so annoyed by people just saying the 4-Hour Work Week isn't possible, because I was like, did you even read the book? It's not even about a 4-hour work week. It's just a good title, you know, it snaps off the shelf. But I must concede that the reality is that is so possible. And we've seen it happen so many times. There's so many of our members work 4 hours a week. It's for real. It's an absolutely for real thing. One of the things that I see very different below 7 figures versus beyond 7 figures is this working intensity thing. Often below 7 figures, there's just a lot of stuff that you have to do, and you can't necessarily afford all the pieces in place to do it. And so you're really facing down this concept of, I'm going to work all day. I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to do the personal stuff I need to do. And then I'm going to work at night again, you know, and that's what my life's going to look like for a while. But with this group, some people are like that. A lot of people are not. But the main thing is the leveraged decision making. It's like everyone there is looking to make 1 or 2 good decisions a year. And because of that, there is a chiller intellectual environment. It's not like, I got to know this. Oh man, I can't believe I haven't done this yet or whatever. There's sort of like a more of a quiet confidence. Of course, they've gotten to a certain level, but just the sense that I know I need to do one focused, impactful thing because of this event. Here's what I'm workshopping. Here's how it's getting organized. Here's when it's going to roll out. And here's what I expect the outcome to be. And there's a little just more of this lower frenetic energy and more of a focused, forceful, this is the move I got to make right now. Those are our generalities. Those are our overall views. There's just so many interesting niches. Like we have SaaS apps that help accountants, people that help people blow up on YouTube. We had multiple fitness founders, whether it's app programs, training programs. We had erotic literature. We had lead generation SaaSes. We had some of the top language learning apps in the world. Very cool products like consumer products that you might own or know about. We haven't signed off on everybody, whether we could talk about this stuff or not. So suffice to say, there's just luxury events was one. There's just a lot of different ways that people can tap into what they love, what they consume, and make one of the best versions of the world in it. If they're willing to be curious, figure out how this stuff works, and just stick to it for 3 years or more. The second thing I wanted to point out is just wealth and value scenarios in Thailand. Because you can't go to Thailand without thinking about moving to Thailand. I mean, we had so many cool experiences, like our lunches. The bill comes, you have a view of these incredible ocean views. The breeze is flowing through your knot hair, and you're sitting there, and you're thinking, "Wow, this is a great value. Everybody here is friendly. There's so many interesting people that come to Thailand, and it's just a fun vibe." One of the things I spoke with a member who's functionally retired, as many are, and I said, "Well, how much does it take nowadays to retire in Thailand?" So I just want to share this number for anybody out there curious thinking about it. The number that was reported to me was about 3 million invested, and super cool if you can make 5,000 a month cash flow, which most people listening to this podcast right now, because I know 80% of you own businesses, spinning up a hustle or a business that makes $5,000 a month for you, that's within reach for 80% of us right now. If it's not in reach for you, keep listening to this podcast. It will feel natural very soon. This is a very achievable number. What's interesting, Ian, is that we know more than a handful of multi-millionaire founders who live in Thailand who cannot find a way to spend more than $5,000 a month. And they're living in amazing homes and condos and apartments. They have all kinds of services. Their kids are in international schools. Maybe the international school is sort of a different price bracket,
Yeah.
but the basic idea is that for many cities in Thailand, it's very hard to spend more than that $5,000 a month. You're going to have to be doing, and that's just for your life in Thailand. Of course, if you want to do like a Europe summer trip, or if you want to tour North America or something like that, you're going to add to that budget. But I just thought I'd toss it out there. It's just so fascinating what you can achieve in Thailand for so little. I pretty much think it's the goat country right now for entrepreneurs for value in terms of dollar.
100%, man. And I was on the plane over there, and they're advertising their new 20-year visa on the plane. Yeah. Meanwhile, I'm in America. I've fly back to America. There's 30 minutes of PA discussions about nothing I want to hear about. You know what I mean? It's just procedure and protocol.
One of the other things about Thailand is for a lot of members, depending on your tax regime, you can perform incredible tax minimization strategies with different company organizations, whether you have you're doing business in Singapore or Hong Kong, you're living in Thailand, these sorts of setups, while primarily selling to a Western audience, have created dramatic wealth scenarios for our members.
Tons of advantage to be had if you want to retire in Thailand. Certainly tons of advantage to be had if you want to baseline or bootstrap from Thailand too. We talked about this in the early days. This is still the case. It is a wonderful place to go and get started in your business because you can keep your expenses so low.
Right. And a lot of people say, there's certain people say, how am I ever going to get $3 million? There's a lot of people listening. They're going to say $3 million is not enough. But the idea is basically your whole life's still ahead of you. These are people in their 30s saying this, right? And the concept is you lock in some level of financial security, and then you have creative freedom. And I think that is the concept of bootstrapping. That is the concept of baselining. That is the concept of our version of financial independence, retire early, which is maybe not just hang it up and, play golf the rest of your days, but now all of a sudden, you have the freedom to go out there and get curious about the next thing and pursue whatever it is you're passionate about. So I think that's really interesting. By the way, I just reminded something we should have included in the first segment is that I believe every single person who came to this event is bootstrapped.
Correct.
So no need to get into this silly lottery game of investors. And I even heard, I was speaking with a member yesterday, some fund offered them a deal, and oh my God, you know how it is, the interactions and the percentages of payoffs and all the lock-ins and all the requirements. And it's just just bootstrap the thing, Work 4 hours a week, work 40 hours a week, retire to Thailand, do what you want,
Yeah.
make your own decisions. That short term taking the money, it just feels like it doesn't work out as well as what we're seeing in long term with bootstrapping. All right. So our second point, we just wanted to nerd out on the value of Thailand, GOAT status for sort of affordable bootstrapping, and just a wonderful place to visit. So if you haven't yet been to Thailand, come visit us in October. All right, the third reflection, I just wrote time in the game plus 7-figure scale equals durability and optionality. There's a lot of uncertainty in the markets, and I've been hearing from especially small agency owners, small content sites have been disrupted by SEO. There's a lot of people trying to figure out, what their next steps are going to be and how they're going to deal with this uncertainty. Didn't feel a lot of that in the room this past week. And I just think, we talk about the 1,000-day principle is you're working really hard, struggling to get past those first 3 years. But if you can find product market fit and you get past 7 figures, year 4, year 5, year 6, all of a sudden there's just this sense of confidence, of options, of the ability to pivot, the ability, because you own the business outright, that you can get profitable at any moment. You can get radically profitable, right? You've got millions coming in at the top, every year. You've got a lot of options in terms of what you can do with that business. And it just leads to a different mindset during times like this in the marketplace where there's more broader uncertainty, but there was a lot of quiet confidence in the room. And, not all businesses are affected by the slowdown. A lot of people are doing really well right now.
Yeah.
So that was definitely a feeling in the room that there was just this high agency vibe, like, okay, my business is flat right now. One SaaS founder was like, my business is completely flat right now. I run a SaaS. Here's what I'm doing about it. I'm right sizing this. I'm going to add this thing. I'm going to change this element. And it's like, yeah, you just got to make a decision at this point because the asset itself is so powerful. The customer ecosystem, the product, the history, and now the agency, right? Because we're not serving any outside masters. We don't have investors. So I have 100% control over the next move here. And that feeling was very palpable in the room over the last week.
With the durability can come like a little bit of like complacency too. Like meaning like you're fine, right? You're like, yeah, I'm here, I'm fine. So the question is like, well, what else do I have to do? And I think a lot of founders are motivated by this idea that they want to stay there. And again, I think to get there is a lot harder than to stay there. But then you do have to make, like you said, like 1 or 2 moves a year to kind of stay there. So we're talking with a guy that owns a language learning app, kind of figuring out like a pricing strategy that might work for him going forward because has some churn in the business. And kind of what we figured out during lunch, I think it was like unofficial work session at lunch, was like basically a tiered pricing scheme. And it wasn't something that he had to explore before because he just didn't have the problem, right? So, I think it's like you said, it's like these 1 or 2 things a year that you can do to potentially, quote, stay on top, of your business. And I think that's part of what makes it durable too, is like you're not messing with the pie or the recipe like so much. It's like it's already formed. You're just trying to make it better. And I think that's what we accomplished there at lunch. Whether or not he does it or not, that'll be up to him. But like there is an amount of like just tweaking that needs to happen, I think, to ensure your durability.
Number 4 is these entrepreneurs were very serious about AI workflows. And so we did presentations, we had discussions about it throughout the weekend. It was fascinating to see the custom applications for each business that these founders are finding through their personal research.
Yeah, somebody was writing a book using AI, like very intelligently. Another person was working on their automation workflows through AI, like the way that they interact with their customer and the way that informs their product. Yeah, shout out. I think they were using make.com. Pretty interesting. So we shared that with the team once we got back. I think, Dan, though, one of the things that is like worth discussion, maybe not necessarily on this podcast, but in the future, is like I'm still trying to figure out for our types of companies, are people making money with AI or are they saving money with AI?
Mostly saving.
I think you're right. There are certainly people that are making, right? Like they're the ones that are making the tools like make.com, right? They're making money. But I think in our application, in our companies, a lot of people are figuring out, workflows that are saving them money. And I kind of relate it to like the wave that happened 5-10 years ago, which is we all started offshoring talent. Basically, we figured out that you can hire an accountant and everybody else for a fraction of the cost, Latin America. And so that was kind of the first wave of this is like, hey, to be competitive, to stay competitive, I need to have a workforce that, basically has my cost in line with my competitors or less. Okay, now I can survive. And I think a lot of the same is true with AI, which is like, hey, these tools are making it so we can eliminate the offshore talent or we can augment the offshore talent or we can save costs in this way.
I don't think there's like an AI solution that we saw in the room that like is printing cash yet, aside from the examples, like you said, of people sort of packaging AI workflows as a SaaS and they're scaling quickly because a lot of people don't want to fire up make.com and build a workflow. They just want to buy a SaaS.
Yeah.
So that's an opportunity. But what you're seeing is like, I almost imagine it like, imagine if you right now had like 2 full-time virtual assistants with nothing to do. What would you have them do to help generate revenue? And that's like maybe a way, like you said, like for those who haven't dabbled as deeply as some of our members, how you can put this stuff to work. So the key tools seem to be something like a make.com where you're basically like splicing together apps. So a common workflow would be like a swiper, a scraper. So I want you to scrape this information. Now I want to dunk it into an AI like ChatGPT with this prompt. So everything you scrape over here, prompt it with this, that changes the information or makes a query, and then dunk it into Airtable over here. And so a way you could use this is to, for example, empower your sales team. So it's like, before I get on a sales call, I want to know what they last said on social. I want to know what their Facebook says, and I want to know this. Now you could also say, here are the 5 people I'm talking to this week who are 5 people like them right now. Or you could go into your inbox and scrape that information. So you're starting to be able to create, you can see like, you're starting to create these like very customized, tailored research projects that could juice your sales or marketing. So that seems like a popular way that founders are using this to create revenue opportunities, but it does still rely at this moment for our founders, a human getting involved at some point. But it's not so hard to imagine that these phone calls, these emails could be completely executed by an AI sales and marketing force in the very near future.
Yeah.
So before we get on the last point, I just want to have a brief intermission and remind everybody to breathe, because one of the cool things we did was a guided meditation. And I'll tell you what, these monks, man, this meditation stuff is good. And a lot of them are balling out. Let's just be real. Being a monk is not a bad business.
That's
straight balling, man. Just put on the orange robe. It's got a gravitas to it. And, people are more willing to enter into a contract, I think, with someone in an orange robe.
I think you're right. And, during the guided meditation, I looked over and I saw all the people with young families because they fell asleep instantly. And I was like, that guy's got new kids. That person's got new kids. I was like, it was almost an equation.
All right. Final point. Why do I just want to reflect on this idea a little bit. I think partially for me, because I had flown away from my family the whole way across the globe for this. And it was so worth it. It's a sacrifice on the one hand, but I got so much out of it. So I flew out of there, pages and pages of notes, new ideas, different directions we could take. And I thought, man, like these people are not a bunch of introverted, isolated nerds. Yes, curious and geeky, but they've got friends, they've got families, they've got robust social networks. Why are they coming to events like this? What's different about it versus whatever you're getting in your current networks? I thought we could just maybe discuss that a little bit. Like, why do this in the first place? One of the reasons we started hosting the majority of our events, like far from where people live, in these kind of like embedded type venues where we're all just hanging around together for a few days and constantly doing things, is that when you have a conference in like a major American city, like maybe like a Las Vegas, or we've done a few here in Austin, people tend to stay like in different places because, you know, cost, or they might have a relative over here, they might visit the city a lot or whatever. And something about it feels more transactional. Like people kind of come to the thing they want to come to, or they have another meeting over here. But in this scenario, when you're in a compound in Thailand, you know, or you're down in Playa del Carmen in Mexico, or you're in this 5-star hotel in Bangkok, or in a resort in Barcelona or whatever, there's just this quality of these conversations simply rarely happen in other venues where you build rapport with people. We walk people through exercises that even in the early years of us running this business, we thought were maybe a little bit too much. Like, hey, rotate now and now ask this question, like that kind of thing. But what it actually does over time is you build this comfort and rapport and knowledge about people. And it's quite intentional, where we're writing down specific things about our business, specific things about X element of problem we're trying to solve. And now like 20 other people know about that, or the people you've revealed it to know about it. And you just dig deep for hours on end. And it's very hard to do that even with close friends in your hometown. If you're hanging out for an hour here, an hour there, it's weird to like kind of monopolize the conversation on current interest or challenge. Partially by the way, I think people enjoy talking to AI so much is because you can kind of just like hang out on the same problem and keep prompting. It's a similar vibe at these events, actually, like where there's a lot of focus, where you're just digging deeper and you're building a relationship around that, but you're also sort of giving and getting a lot. And it is almost like this sandbox for curiosity, like unabashed, unfiltered curiosity for days on end. And I think that's why people do it, because you just walk with a kind of a clarity and an energy that is hard to get without sort of just this concept of closing that laptop for 2 or 3 days and figuring out what the person across from you has figured out about life, because you know they've figured out a lot, and like digging in and helping out and getting the same in return. I think that's really what makes these things magical.
Agree. And I'd like to think, unlike magic mushrooms, perhaps that the effects will last with you a little bit longer. You know, that's always the challenge, man, with like the meditation and the mushrooms and the event. It's like, how much did you retain and actually implement into your business afterwards?
Yeah.
Dan, if this sounded exciting to you, hopefully it did, because you were there and you just talked about it for 30 minutes.
I'm excited. Yeah.
Well, we have a lot of these events coming up. Shoot over to the dynamitecircle.com. You can see our whole event schedule. It's never been so robust, man. We're on a plane again this year in 2025 a bunch of times to meet with you, listeners of this podcast and founders of these amazing businesses.
We had a particularly good time, just like eating great Thai food. We spent a lot of time in the pool. We did a pool mastermind, talking about business, about next steps. I just had so much fun. I can't wait to go back in October. So looking forward to that. Thanks to everyone who joined us this past week. Your stories are inspiring us, and will lead to a lot of future podcast episodes. No question. I got a bunch lined up here. So thanks to everybody for coming out. And thank you for listening. We'll be back next Thursday morning as always.
See you then.